All right, let's talk playmakers today on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I think I've said this the last couple of days that we were going to talk about this at some point this week, and now seems like as good a time as any, because if there's been any point of emphasis in Pitt's recruiting class thus far, what we've seen out of it so far as the coaches have put it together and throughout the cycle, and then certainly this month of June, has been a pretty heavy emphasis on offensive playmakers. Why is that? Why are the Pitt coaches emphasizing wide receivers and running backs? I mean, you always need wide receivers and running backs, but is there a particular reason why right now in this recruiting class of 2025, the Pitt staff with a brand new offensive coaching staff is emphasizing bringing these guys in? And what kind of players have they landed? What are they going to be for Pitt? How do they fit into the offense? What's the appeal there? It's just been a lot of movement with playmakers, a lot of movement with offensive skill guys, so I figured we could talk about that. Plus, we got a preview of a 4-star recruit's commitment coming up today, just in a couple hours. Hopefully, if you're watching this before 9 a.m., it'll be coming up in a couple hours. And if you're watching it after 9 a.m., well, this has already come to pass. But we'll talk about that. We'll talk about a commitment that's incoming, or a commitment decision that's incoming here later this morning, as well as the emphasis on playmakers and what it means for Pitt and Pitt recruiting. Lots of recruiting talk for you today on the Wednesday edition of the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Wednesday. It's the Morning Pitt. It's youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You see the website below. Don't click that. That's not a link, but it is an image, and it is the website you need to type into your browser bar so you can go get the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news that you're going to find. Football, basketball, and recruiting, we have it all covered at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Everything is there for you, and message boards to talk to other Pitt fans. There's lots of conversation happening right now on the football front, on the basketball front, certainly a lot of recruiting talk, and everything else in between. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, and the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, the place where you can get all of your Pitt video content, like these daily Morning Pitt videos, our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night. That'll be tonight at 8 p.m. Looking forward to that. And, of course, lots of other things. Press conferences, interviews, highlights, practice video, all that kind of stuff. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So like this video and subscribe, and you won't miss any of it. Don't forget, Jim and I will be live tonight, 8 o'clock. Like I said, we have our weekly live show. Just want to reemphasize that because we'd love it if you tune in and join the conversation. It's always fun to get into those, to hang out for an hour and talk a little Pitt sports with your, Jim and I talking, and then you guys joining in the conversation with the comments in the chat screen. All right. Got some stuff to talk about with offensive skill guides. It's kind of my main interest today. But before we get to that, there is a commitment announcement happening this morning. A lot of guys, most of the guys who have visited Pitt, yesterday I kind of ran down the list of recruits who have visited Pitt, but not committed anywhere, kind of, where they stand and where they're at, where Pitt is at. And a lot of them are committing over the next, let's say the 26th, so a week from today will be like July 3rd. A lot of them are committing over the next week and a half. A lot of the guys that are still on the board out there. And so one of them is happening today, and it's Mason Alexander, a 4-star defensive back prospect, a 4-star cornerback from Fishers, Indiana. He's Hamilton Southeastern High School. He's going to announce his commitment later this morning. It's scheduled for a 9 a.m. announcement on Instagram Live. So, if you're watching this video or listening to this podcast before 9 a.m., you still have time to tune in. And if not, you listen to it afterward. Well, guess what? That happened earlier today. Alexander's got a top 3 of Pitt, Florida, and Purdue. He took official visits to Purdue and most recently Pitt. His Pitt official visit was this past weekend, and now he's making his commitment today. Good prospect, number 34 cornerback prospect in the recruiting class of 2025. Got about 25 offers or so. Lots of power conference offers. I mean, running down the list here, Pitt, Purdue, Missouri, Wisconsin, Auburn, Cincinnati, Florida, Indiana, Kentucky, Louisville, Maryland, Miami, Florida, Michigan State, Minnesota, Ole Miss, Nebraska, Oregon, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, West Virginia. Lots of good offers in there. Like I say, sort of a top 3 of Pitt, Florida, and Purdue, but really it's probably a top 2 of Pitt and Purdue since those were the 2 official visits he took, and now he'll be committing later today. I like Pitt's chances. We'll see what he ultimately ends up deciding. Purdue and their coaching staff has a pretty good history with with defensive backs, we should say. We saw Pitt lose Coy Beasley to Purdue last summer. And that was a tough one to lose. A safety prospect, a defensive back prospect, picking Purdue over Pitt was a tough one. We'll see if Pitt can get one back today with Mason Alexander. That commitment, like I said, will be at 9 a.m. That's his plan, is 9 a.m. And if you're watching this video ahead of 9 a.m., it may happen at 9 a.m., but recruits do funny things sometimes, and sometimes they switch it up. We'll see what time he ends up actually announcing his commitment. Hopefully it happens right at 9 a.m., and then there won't be any mystery about it. If you're watching it later in the day and he still hasn't committed, well, that's what happens in recruiting sometimes. The other thing that happens in recruiting sometimes is you look to fill in positions and gaps and holes where you have them. And I don't know, entering this recruiting cycle, I don't know if I would have sat back and said, wow, there's a major hole at the offensive skill positions, because you look at the 2024 projected scholarship roster, there's like 6 scholarship running backs and 11 scholarship wide receivers. That seems like a pretty decent number. Earlier in the recruiting cycle, we would have said there were 12 scholarship wide receivers, including Izzy Polk, who ended up going into the transfer portal after spring camp. Seems like a pretty decent number to have, like 17 offensive skill guys on the roster, scholarship-wise. And yet, when you look a little bit closer at it, it's maybe not as deep and prolific as you might have thought. And I think there are a few reasons for that. I think there are a few sort of caveats that go along with it. And one thing that you have to emphasize when you talk about offensive skill recruiting, and something that I'll probably come back to a lot and say a lot today, is an entirely new coaching staff. And a bit, when you have an entirely new coaching staff on one side of the ball, they're probably going to look to populate that side of the ball with guys who fit their offensive scheme. We'll try to set the short jokes aside, but yeah, the offensive skill players that Cade Bell and his staff have been going after are not necessarily the biggest guys, but they're certainly players with speed. There's certainly players with explosiveness. And I think when you even look at the transfers that Cade Bell has brought in on the offensive side of the ball, particularly Desmond Reed, the running back from Western Carolina, Sincere Lee, the wide receiver from Western Carolina, and Raphael Williams, the wide receiver from Western Carolina who came here by way of San Diego State, they're all small but fast. And that's not to be reductive or mean about their prospects, but they are small but fast. That's who they are. That's how they are, and that's largely how you would define them. It's just how it goes, and it's just who they are. You can't lie about height, and you really can't lie about speed. I mean, you are as tall as you are, and you are as fast as you are. And the guys that they brought in, Lee, Williams, and Reed, are all short, and they are all fast. So they've got that going for them, which is nice. What's interesting to me, and we can talk about the skill sets in a minute, but what's really interesting to me is that right now, as this recruiting class stands with 17 commitments, 17 announced commitments, 6 of them are these offensive skill guys. 6 of them are wide receivers or running backs, and sometimes a little bit of both. There's Jacarian Turner, Demarion Folks, Khalil Sterling, Sinquan Smith, Bryce Yates, and Tony Kinsler. Sinquan Smith, mostly a running back, pretty much exclusively a running back. Tony Kinsler and Jacarian Turner have the potential to do both. Bryce Yates, Khalil Sterling, and Demarion Folks, pretty much exclusively wide receivers. So you got a handful of receivers, you got a running back, and then you got a couple of guys who can do a little bit of both and will probably move around and play both positions in different ways and be deployed in different ways. Again, we'll get into the individual skill sets in a minute, but what's interesting is the number. And I think this really hit me in the last day or two. I mean, they got more over the weekend. They got Khalil Sterling over the weekend. They got Sinquan Smith over the weekend. And I sat back at one point and I looked at the commitment list and I was like, geez, they've got like 6 offensive skill guys, like not counting Max Hunt, the tight end who's basically a big wide receiver, and not counting Mason Heinschel, the quarterback. Like, don't even count those guys. Just talking about wide receivers and running backs, they've got 6. That's a ton. You look back over the last 6 recruiting classes prior to this one, there was one time they took that many receivers and running backs. It was actually 2 classes ago, the 2023 recruiting class. They signed 4 wide receivers and 2 running backs. That group is already down to 4 because TJ Harvison, the running back, who was one of the 2 backs, has transferred. And Israel Polk, the wide receiver, has transferred. Harvison, I haven't seen where he ended up. Polk, I think, went to Akron or someplace. But that one was a big class of offensive skill guys. This past year's class, 2 receivers and 1 running back. 2022 class, 2 receivers and 1 running back. 21, 2 of each. 2020, 2 receivers and 1 running back. 2019, 2 of each. And I cut off there because those are ultimately the recruiting classes that are relevant to the discussion of the current roster. 2019 through 2024. Those 6 recruiting classes make up the current roster. And we include 2019 because those guys, if they were still on the roster, and actually one of them still is, could be here for an extra year, a 6th year of eligibility due to the COVID rules. And that's Daniel Carter. Vincent Davis is gone, Jared Wayne is gone, Will Gibson is gone, the other 3 guys from that recruiting class, but they could be here. You know, maybe not Wayne because he never redshirted, so he could have come back last year, and last year would have been his final year of eligibility. Same thing with Vincent Davis, but we include them for the purposes of this conversation. And the purpose of this conversation is to say that the last 6 classes of offensive skill guys, wide receivers and running backs, have had a lot of holes and have had a lot of players leave. 2019, let's set it aside because not everybody from that class would have made it to this point anyway, you know, particularly Jared Wayne and Vincent Davis, who didn't redshirt as freshmen, right? 2020, they signed 3 offensive skill guys, 3 receivers and running backs, 2 receivers, 1 running back. Jordan Addison, Jalen Barden, Izzy Abanikanda. Addison transferred but went to the NFL early. Abanikanda went to the NFL early. You're not going to bemoan that. If you have guys who are good enough, who play well enough to go to the NFL early, you can't complain too much about that. Addison transferred, but he was never going to be on the roster in 2023 anyway, let alone 2024, barring some shocker. Same thing with Abanikanda. Jalen Barden went into the transfer portal. I think he's on his 3rd school now. Either way, that entire class is gone. 2021 recruiting class. Pitt signed 4 offensive skill guys, 2 receivers and 2 running backs. 3 out of those 4 are no longer here. Jaden Bradley, Miles Alston, both wide receivers have transferred, as well as Malik Newton, who was medically disqualified and ended up where did he go? West Virginia State or someplace like that, and maybe somewhere else after that. Rodney Hammond is the only player from that class still on the roster. 2022, they signed 2 receivers and 1 running back. Jordan Bailey, the running back, never ever made it to campus due to academic concerns. Addison Copeland, one of the wide receivers, transferred this offseason. I think he's at a junior college. Che Wabuko is still here. And then you come up to 2023, they signed 6 guys. 2 of them have gone into the transfer portal, Izzy Polk and TJ Harvison. If you look 2020 through 23, 4 recruiting classes that should make up the bulk of the players on this roster, not counting the brand new freshmen who are coming in, the 3 guys who are coming in now, Tyreek Robinson and Cam Montero and Juelz Goff, not counting those guys because they're brand new. We're not going to include them. We're just looking at retention and what the previous recruiting has brought. And you look at 4 recruiting classes, 2020 through 23, Pitt signed 16 wide receivers and running backs. 10 of them have transferred, leaving just 6 guys. And 4 of those 6 were in last year's recruiting class. Like they're redshirt freshmen or sophomores. You know, Montravius Lloyd, Lamar Seymour, Zion Fowler-El, and Kenny Johnson. From the classes before that, you have Che Wabuko and Rodney Hammond. Long story short, maybe not that short, maybe not that long. Long story short, the past 4 recruiting classes of wide receivers and running backs have pretty much, I don't want to say busted out. And it's hard to even say like 4 classes because that 2023 recruiting class, Seymour, Fowler-El, Izzy Polk, Montravius Lloyd, and TJ Harvison, 5 out of the 6 all redshirted. You know, Kenny Johnson was the only guy in that group who didn't redshirt. So it's tough to say, wow, they busted. But I mean, if you look at the classes of 2020, 21, and 22, they signed 10 running backs and receivers, and 8 of them have transferred. There's just not a whole lot there. And so Cade Bell walks into this situation and looks at the offensive personnel and says, what do we got? And says, wow, got a lot of guys who are redshirt freshmen or sophomores. We'll find out about them. And then that's kind of it. Because all the veteran players on this team, the offensive skill guys, for the most part, are transfers. You look at the wide receivers, there's 11 scholarship wide receivers. All right? 4 of those 11 scholarship wide receivers on the 2024 roster are transfers. Guys who came in and transferred at some point, whether it's Dejon Reynolds and Kanate Mumfield, who transferred in the last couple of years, or Sincere Lee and Raphael Williams, who transferred this offseason. Now, when you narrow it down to juniors and seniors, Pitt's got 5 scholarship juniors and seniors at wide receiver on this 2024 roster. One of them is Jake McConaughey, that I don't know if he's going to stay on scholarship or not. That's kind of up in the air. I think it's up in the air. But of the other 4 junior and senior scholarship wide receivers, Kanate Mumfield, Dejon Reynolds, Sincere Lee, Raphael Williams. They're all transfers. They're all transfers. The upper classes all have I don't want to say busted, because that seems harsh, but they're just poof. They're off into the ether. They're gone. And so there are major holes on this roster, at the offensive skill positions. We talked yesterday about defensive line, about needing to restock the defensive line, about needing to rebuild the foundation of the defensive line. I mean, they need to do that with the offensive skill guys, because I'm not sure that Tyreek Robinson, Cam Montero, and Juelz Goff is enough to really rebuild it. Even if you add it on top of all the guys they signed a year ago, of which 2 are already gone. I shouldn't be surprised that they went for a big offensive skill group in this recruiting class, because they need it. They need to pile as many playmakers as they can onto this roster, because we're talking exclusively in terms of numbers right now. When we're talking about the recruits that they've gotten and the recruits that they've held on to and the guys who have transferred, we're talking exclusively just in terms of personnel numbers. It says nothing of ability. It says nothing of playmaking skills. It says nothing of whether these guys on the roster are any good. And I think some of them are. But I don't think it's a shock that they felt in this recruiting class, that the coaches felt they needed to rebuild those positions. Now, we can get into a separate discussion, and we probably will over the course of the summer, about who they're rebuilding the positions with. As I say, Turner, Folks, Smith, Sterling, Yates, Kinsler, they're not very big. They're all maybe listed at 5'11" or shorter, probably 5'10" or shorter. Again, one of our mantras, and I've been saying it a lot over the last couple of weeks. I'm going to say it a lot over this summer, and I'm going to say it a lot this season. Cade Bell and people who have worked with him talk a lot about how he schemes guys open, how the system gets players open, gets the wide receivers open. Well, they better hope so, because at the size of these guys, it's not impossible to win contested catches, combat catches, and all those things, but it's a hell of a lot harder. It's harder if you're 5'10", 165, 5'9", 165, 5'10", 175, whatever it may be. It's a lot harder to win those combat catches and those contested catches. So he better be able to scheme guys open, or else it's going to be really hard to complete passes. Now, if he is as good at scheming guys open as he believes, and the other coaches who have worked with him believe, I mean, Lindsey Lamar talked about it, J.J. Laster talked about it, Jeremy Darvo talked about it, Cade Bell has talked about it, about being able to get guys open with the design of the offense and the play calling. If he's as good as everybody sort of makes him out to be, well, then they might just have something. Because I think these guys can make plays. I mean, we've gone over the stats with these receivers and running backs in the recruiting class over the last couple of weeks, certainly the last couple of days, with the guys who just committed. I think Khalil Sterling has a chance to be really good. I like Ja'Karian Turner a lot. I mean, all these guys, you look, they have lots of yards after the catch. They're breaking long touchdowns. They're scoring in every way possible, and it's great. But they need to be open. They need to be schemed open. If they are, and it works, and you have a quarterback who can get the ball to them, they can make a lot of plays. And I think that's probably the book on C.J. Lee and Raphael Williams and Desmond Reed. is that if you can get them the ball, if you can get them open and get them the ball, they're going to make plays. You just got to pull off those first two parts. I think those guys are capable of doing their end, doing their part, but you've got to pull off the first two elements there. You've got to scheme them open, and you've got to get the ball to them. And we'll find out about those two. Because if you don't have those two pieces, then all the yak and all the long touchdowns and the returns and the special teams and the sweeps and all those different things that all these guys did on their high school highlight film, which is a lot of fun to watch because they're scoring touchdowns and lots of different ways, none of it matters if they can't get open. And some of that's going to fall on the play design, play calling, and general game plan. So, in case you thought, or in case you forgot how much was sort of riding on this hire being the right hire, that's a little reminder. All right, we'll keep it rolling here tonight. We've got the live show at 8 o'clock. Tune in right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com to hang out with me and Jim Hammett, talk a little Pitt sports. Stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com for all the Pitt sporting news you can possibly handle, football, basketball, and recruiting. Got a lot going on, and you want to make sure you keep it tuned in. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Like this video and subscribe so you don't miss any of our Pitt video content. See you tonight on the live stream. See you tonight tomorrow. That's good English right there. See you tonight on the live stream, and we'll catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pitt. Right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.